It began just after the sun slipped below the horizon, casting the kingdom's war camp into a twilight haze that felt heavier than usual. At first it was subtle, a flicker in the corner of the eye, a whisper of movement where nothing should have been. Then it became impossible to ignore. Doubles. Not metaphorical, not figurative, but literal, magical copies of the Jester and his closest allies, shimmering with an eerie glint and grinning with unsettling familiarity. I was the first to notice my own double, or rather, my double noticed me. It happened in the war tent, where maps lay sprawled like an ancient beast across the table, and the smell of damp parchment mingled with candle smoke. The flickering light caught the double's distorted features, and the air seemed to hum with the faint, discordant jingling of bells, as if my cap's usual cheerful chime had been twisted into a mocking sneer. "Well, this is a fine mess," I muttered, eyeing the imposter whose grin stretched too wide, whose eyes betrayed a flicker of malevolence beneath the fool's facade. "You're the real one, right?" Lady Mirabelle asked when she found me staring at the apparition. Her voice was steady, but the crease between her brows told a different story. "Because there's one of you outside arguing with Grimwald, and neither seems inclined to listen to the other." Grimwald, that mountain of a man with his scarred face and heavy mace, was indeed locked in what appeared to be a heated debate with his own double. The two were nearly indistinguishable, save for the subtle twitch of the imposter's smirk and the unnatural stillness of his stance. I had to admit, the sight was more comical than terrifying, if only it weren't so dangerous. The enemy's illusionist had outdone himself. Council meetings turned into absurd spectacles of confusion. At one point, two Lady Mirabelles sat across from each other, their voices overlapping in a dizzying echo beneath the vaulted stone ceilings. One insisted on a cautious approach. The other was aggressively optimistic, and neither would yield. The real Lady Mirabelle's frustration was palpable, but the others, the copies, seemed to delight in stoking discord. Soldiers on the field were no better. At dawn, the battlefield was shrouded in mist that curled like ghostly fingers around the ranks. The men and women hesitated, torn between following their true commander, Grimwald, or the perfect imitation standing beside him. The silence was punctuated only by distant cawing crows, a natural chorus to the surreal drama unfolding. In the midst of this chaos, it was my job as full king, and the only honest voice in a kingdom drowning in lies, to see through the smoke and mirrors. My truth-telling nature, once a source of courtly annoyance, became my greatest weapon. I had to trust my instincts, those tiny flickers of discomfort and inconsistency that betrayed the falsehoods. The confrontation was inevitable. Back in the war tent, I faced my double once more. Our eyes locked, and I realized the battle wasn't just physical but psychological, a dance of wits and wills. "Why me?" I asked, voice low. "Why create a fool's double?" The imposter's grin deepened, but there was no warmth in it. Because fools are dangerous. They see what others miss. They speak what others hide. And chaos is the perfect cloak for deception. Their words are stung, but they rang true. The illusion was designed not just to confuse, but to fracture trust, to make allies doubt each other and themselves. The stakes were higher than ever. Yet, even as the doppelgangers sowed discord, our resolve hardened. Trust, I realized, was not about perfection or certainty, but about the belief in one another's intention and character. I called a meeting, not to confirm identities, that was impossible, but to remind my council and army of what bound us, shared purpose, shared trials, and the truth behind our laughter. "We are not defined by appearances," I told them, standing before the gathered crowd in the great hall, "but by the choices we make when the mirrors crumble." It was a risky gamble, relying on faith rather than evidence, but it rekindled the flickering flame of unity. Still, as night draped the castle battlements in a swirl of purples and golds, I stood alone, contemplating the fragile line we walked between truth and illusion. The silence was a gentle reminder that in this war, the mind was the battlefield, and the dance of the doppelgangers was far from over. I jingled my cap thoughtfully. Fools and doubles, I mused aloud, two sides of the same coin. And I suppose it's up to me to decide which face to show the world next. The wind whispered back, carrying with it the promise of more tricks, more truths, and the unending game that was our kingdom's fate. To be continued. If you asked anyone in the land what the most foolish thing a king could do was, most would mutter something about invading a neighboring kingdom without an army, or perhaps marrying a dragon for political alliance, or even more sensibly declaring war on a cloud. But to stand in the very eye of a storm of magical illusions and shout the unvarnished truth, that, dear reader, was the Jester's gambit. The War Council tent was a cacophony of nervous whispers, the rustling of maps, and the occasional, unintentional clatter of a dropped dagger. Captain Quibble, looking more confused than ever, leaned over a parchment that might have been a battle plan or a recipe for Stewhard to tell under the candlelight. "Now, listen here," the Jester began, his voice a mix of jest and command. "We're not going to win this war by playing by the usual rules. Our enemy's strength lies not in swords or spears, but in shadows and smoke illusions that bend reality like a drunk wizard's wand." Madame Mira nodded, her eyes gleaming with a mix of respect and skepticism. "And your solution, your majesty?" "Truth," the Jester said simply, jingling the bells on his cap. "A simple, brutal truth. Nothing fancy. No magic, no smoke and mirrors. Just the stark, naked facts." A ripple of disbelief swept through the room. Captain Quibble scratched his helmet. "You want us to march into battle shouting the truth? Want that just confuse the enemy?" "Precisely," the Jester replied, a grin tugging at his lips. "Confuse them so badly that their own illusions collapse under the weight of their confusion." The plan was as absurd as the Jester himself, to use the power of unfiltered honesty as a weapon against the enemy's deceptions. The soldiers were to wear no armor that could reflect illusions. Instead, they would carry mirrors to catch and redirect the enemy's spells, while the Jester would be at the front, ringing his bells and calling out truths that were too inconvenient to ignore. As dawn broke, the battlefield stretched out like a canvas painted in shades of uncertainty. The great illusionist's forces shimmered and flickered, their forms shifting endlessly, one moment fierce knights, the next distorted shadows with eyes like burning coals. The Jester stepped forward, bells jingling a merry tune that cut through the eerie silence. "Behold," he shouted, "your king stands before you, not cloaked in lies or hidden behind shadows, but as he is a fool and a truth-teller." The illusions wavered, some faltering under the weight of his words. Soldiers on both sides blinked, unsure if what they saw was real or yet another trick. Captain Quibble shouted orders, rallying the troops to hold the line with mirrors raised. Amidst the chaos, the Jester found himself face to face with the great illusionist. Their duel was less a clash of weapons and more a dancer, dizzying spectacle of shifting realities and biting wit. The illusionist conjured landscapes that twisted and turned, attempting to trap the Jester in a labyrinth of his own fears and doubts. But the Jester laughed, a clear, ringing sound that seemed to cut through the very fabric of the illusions. "Oh, come now, isn't this all a bit tedious?" he quipped. "Truth's a far better jester than you'll ever be." With a final flourish, the jester produced a small mirror, catching a fragment of the illusionist's magic and reflecting it back. The illusion shattered like glass, and with it, the enemy's confidence. The tide turned swiftly. The jester's army, emboldened by their king's courage and clarity, pressed forward, their laughter breaking the oppressive silence that had hung over the battlefield for so long. When the sun finally set, the illusions lay broken, the enemy scattered, and the jester stood victorious, bells tinkling softly in the evening breeze. Yet, as he looked out over the field, he knew this was but a gambiter daring move in a larger game, with many more truths to tell and many more fools to rally. "Onward, my friends," he called, "for the greatest jest is the one that changes the world." And so the game continued, with truth and folly entwined in a dance as old as time itself. The air was thick with a fog that wasn't quite fog, shimmering and shifting like a bad dream caught in a hall of mirrors. The battlefield stretched out before Usa, chaotic carnival of illusions that would have made a sane man weep or at least question his eyesight. Dragons that breathed not fire but bursts of uncontrollable laughter soared overhead, their scales gleaming with every color of phantom armies marched, their banners fluttering with impossible slogans and their footsteps echoing like the slapstick soundtrack of a farce. I stood at the forefront, the weight of my motley cap a comforting reminder that, perhaps, the world was still a little sane. My bells jingled with every breath, a sound both ridiculous and reassuring. "Listen up, you magnificent fools," I shouted, voice slicing through the cacophony. "Today, we fight not just with swords, but with the truth. Remember, no matter what they show you, no matter how convincing the lies, the only real magic here is honesty, a bit of well-timed slapstick." Grumble, our reluctant knight, was already in the thick of it. The poor sod slipped on what looked like a puddle of quicksilver, arms flailing wildly as he careened into a cluster of invisible enemies. Instead of a disaster, his clumsy tumble sent opponents sprawling, their illusionary forms flickering and fading like bad TV signals. "By the king's missing crown," Grumble grunted, pushing himself up with a sheepish grin, "I meant to do that." Beside me, Mimsy, the whisperer, melted into the shadows, her quiet footsteps barely a whisper against the madness. Where Viridian's illusions screamed with colors and sound, she moved with the subtlety of a secret, unraveling the tangled lies one careful truth at a time. Her whispers were like soft knives, cutting through enchantments that had held the kingdom in fear for too long. Captain Clodhopper, bless his squeaky boots, led a charge that looked more like a dance gone wrong than a military maneuver. Yet somehow, his bumbling bravado rallied the troops, turning confusion into a contagious kind of courage. His shouts left, right, no, wait, just follow me, became the battle cry of a ragtag army, proving that bravery does not always require grace. And then there was Viridian, the master illusionist, whose shimmering cloak seemed to swallow the light itself, conjured a spectacle that would have dazzled and disoriented any lesser foe. Dancing lights shaped like mocking faces, echoing voices that whispered fears and doubts. It was a spell woven from the very fabric of deception. But as he raised his hands, weaving magic through the air like a conductor of chaos, I stepped forward, a grin playing on my lips. "Oh, Viridian," I called out, voice ringing clear amid the madness. "Is that the best you've got? I've seen more convincing trickery in a toddler's tantrum." Our duel began atop a tower of illusions, the world around us flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. Words were our weapons, each phrase a spell that bent reality. I juggled truth and folly with a flair only a fool could master, while Viridian countered with dazzling deceptions and biting sarcasm. "You think honesty can defeat magic?" he sneered, eyes glinting with contempt. "Truth is just another lie waiting to be dressed up." "Maybe," I said, twirling my scepter with a flourish, "but at least it's a lie that wears its own shoes. None of this fancy footwork." The tower trembled beneath us as our words shook the foundations of the illusions. With one final jest, I toppled the grand spectacle, and the spell shattered like glass. The battlefield cleared, and the once maddening fog lifted to reveal a kingdom breathing freely for the first time in ages. The army cheered, laughter ringing out not as a weapon, but as a celebration. We had fought not just with swords, but with the courage to face the absurdity of our world and the truth that lay beneath it. In the end, it was bravery and belief fueled by a fool's heart that turned the tide. As I looked out over the field strewn with the fading remnants of illusions and the tired but triumphant faces of my comrades, I knew this was just the beginning. For in a land where lies had long ruled, the battle for truth was never truly over, but, at least now, it was a fight worth having. "Onward, my friends," I called, bells jingling with renewed hope. For today, the fool reigns and the truth prevails. And with that, the battle of bullshit and bravery became a legend. A story told not just for its absurdity, but for the strange and wonderful magic that happens when honesty meets courage on the field of dreams. The day dawned with a peculiar brightness, as though the very sun had decided to join in the kingdom's collective sigh of relief. Jasper, the Jester, now King Jasper, stood on the palace balcony, his cap's bells jingling faintly in the morning breeze. Below him, the city roared with life, banners fluttered. A cacophony of cheers erupted like waves crashing against the ancient stone walls, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of spring. He grinned, a lopsided, weary smile that crept across his face despite the knot of uncertainty tightening in his gut. "Well," he muttered to no one in particular, "if this is ruling, I imagine the jesters have been holding out on me." Behind him, Sir Bumbleton shuffled in, his armor clanking softly, eyes wide as if still expecting a trap to spring from the shadows. "Your Majesty," he said, nearly tripping over a loose floorboard, "the council awaits your presence. They say it's time to discuss the spoils of war." Jasper sighed, the weight of the crown suddenly feeling less like a joke and more like a millstone. "Very well, Sir Bumbleton, lead the way. Let's see what riddles the grown-ups have prepared for me." The war room was a stark contrast to the vibrant jubilation outside. Maps sprawled across tables, dotted with pins and scribbled notes, while candles flickered in the drafty chamber, casting dancing shadows on weary faces. Lady Mirabelle stood near the hearth, her robes rustling softly as she turned to greet the new king. "Victory has a curious taste, Your Majesty," she said, her voice gentle but edged with caution, sweet on the tongue but bitter in the belly. Jasper nodded, placing his fingers on the map where the last battle had been fought. "I thought defeating the great illusionist would be the end of our troubles. Turns out, it's only the beginning." Sir Bumbleton cleared his throat. "The council is divided on how to proceed, sire. Some want to seize the enemy's lands outright. Others fear the power vacuum will invite worse chaos." Jasper rubbed his temples, the humor that once came so easily now tangled in responsibility. "Honesty has served me well so far," he said, "but I fear the truth is a double-edged sword in court politics. How does one keep the laughter alive when the stakes are so high?" Lady Mirabelle approached, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. perhaps by remembering that even fools can teach kings a thing or two. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of purple and gold, Jasper wandered into the royal garden. The scent of blooming jasmine wrapped around him like a soft cloak, and petals drifted lazily in the breeze. Here, away from the scheming and the endless demands, he found a moment of peace. "You wear the crown well," Lady Mirabelle said quietly, appearing beside him as if summoned by the fading light. Jasper chuckled. "It feels heavier than it looks. But then, I suppose fools are used to carrying burdens no one else sees." She smiled, a rare and genuine expression that warmed the cool air between them. "Remember, even the heaviest crown can be balanced with a light heart." Their quiet moment was interrupted by the arrival of guards escorting the great illusionist through the castle corridors. His shimmering cloak flowed like liquid starlight, eyes sharp and gleaming with a mixture of defiance and reluctant respect as they met Jasper's gaze. "So, Fool King," the illusionist said with a wry smile, "you've won the battle. But can you win the war for your soul?" Jasper met the challenge without flinching, the lessons of the past weeks echoing in his mind. "Perhaps," he replied, "but only if I remember that sometimes the greatest magic lies in laughter and truth, even when the road ahead is uncertain." As the corridor's torches flickered, casting long shadows on stone, Jasper realized that victory was not a destination but a journey, one that demanded courage, wisdom, and a touch of foolishness. And with that thought, he stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next with a jester's heart and a king's resolve. But just as the castle settled into uneasy peace, a whispered rumor began to stir, one that promised the next chapter of this strange and wonderful tale would be anything but dull. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, proclamations, and the kind of chaos that only a kingdom freshly freed from illusion could know. Jasper found himself pulled in a dozen directions at once, from disputes over land rights to the delicate negotiations with neighboring realms, still wary of their new king's reputation. His truth-telling, once a weapon against deception, now required careful calibration. A blunt truth could shatter alliances. A well-placed jest could ease tensions, but missteps were costly. The court became a stage where every smile might hide a dagger, and every word was weighed for meaning beyond its surface. Yet, amidst the turmoil, there were moments of genuine connection. Sir Bumbleton, despite his bumbling ways, proved an invaluable confidant, his loyalty steadfast even when Jasper doubted himself. Lady Mirabelle continued to be a beacon of calm, her wisdom a steady anchor in the swirling storm. One afternoon, Jasper convened his council, the room buzzing with heated debate over the treatment of prisoners captured during the war. The great illusionist sat silently, watching with an inscrutable expression. "We must be just," Jasper declared, voice firm. "If we become the tyrants we fought against, what have we truly won?" Murmurs rippled through the council. Some nodded, others frowned. The illusionist finally spoke, voice smooth as silk. "Justice is a mirror, Your Majesty. It reflects the face of the one who holds it. Choose wisely what you see." Jasper met his gaze squarely. "Then I choose to see a kingdom where honesty and mercy hold equal weight." As the council slowly reached consensus, a tentative hope blossomed in the room. Perhaps, after all, the fool's reward was not just power or glory, but the chance to reshape the very soul of the kingdom. But as night fell and the castle quieted, Jasper knew the road ahead would test him in ways the battlefield never could. For in ruling, as in jesting, the greatest challenge was to remain true to oneself and to the people who looked to him, not just for laughter, but for light in the shadows. And with that, the Fool King prepared to face the dawn of a new era, where every smile hid a story, and every truth carried the weight of a kingdom's future. The story was far from over. Indeed, it was only just beginning. The sun had barely risen over the battered rooftops of the capital when I found myself perched atop the half-reconstructed watchtower, a vantage point that offered a panoramic view of what was, by all accounts, a kingdom in stitches, literally and figuratively. Below, the townsfolk were engaged in a spectacle that could only be described as organized chaos if one were feeling generous, or a circus act with catastrophic potential if feeling less so. Beams were hoisted with the enthusiasm of hopeful amateurs, walls plastered with the precision of blindfolded painters, and the air was alive with laughter, sometimes joyous, sometimes the nervous kind that escapes when you've just dropped a bucket of mortar on your own foot. I adjusted my fool's cap, its bells tinkling merrily as if mocking the seriousness of the task at hand. It was a strange sort of war we had fought, one where the weapons were truth and folly, and the battlefield was our very reality. Now, in the quiet aftermath, the war's echo was not silence, but the cacophony of rebuilding, both of stone and spirit. Lady Mimsy was already in the thick of it, her spectacles slipping down her nose as she attempted to marshal the townspeople for a meeting. Her notes, however, had become an unintended recipe book after a clerk's unfortunate mix-up, leading to a spirited debate over whether to prioritize stew or stonework. The resulting confusion was less a hindrance and more a highlight and emblem of our newfound approach to governance. Earnest, imperfect, and unmistakably human, General Bumble, bless his heart, had taken to leading the soldiers in rebuilding efforts with a zeal that was, frankly, more comical than commanding. Dressed in armor that clanked and clattered with every step, the soldiers marched through the streets in a parade that resembled a jig more than a display of military precision. Yet, beneath the mismatched banners and offbeat cadence, there was a sense of pride and camaraderie that no polished regiment could rival. In the midst of this, town crier Pippin darted about, his bell ringing incessantly as he broadcasted news with the kind of exuberance only found in those who believe the world is worth shouting about, even when it's a mess. His voice was a constant reminder that even amid ruin, the spirit of the people remained unbroken. Later that day, I found myself in an unusual tete-a-tete with King Eldrick, who had returned with the pomp and gravity expected of a monarch, but found himself somewhat disarmed by the absurdity of the situation. Our exchange was a dance of wit and sarcasm, each barb a thread weaving a tapestry of mutual respect beneath the farce. It was a moment that crystallized the paradox of our kingdom, that beneath the laughter and folly lay a profound truth about resilience and renewal. As dusk settled, casting long shadows over the patchwork city, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange alchemy that had brought us here. A kingdom built on lies, illusions, and enchanted foolishness had weathered a war fought with honesty and absurdity. Now, it was healing not with solemn proclamations or grand gestures, but with laughter, shared mishaps, and the stubborn refusal to take itself too seriously. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with more questions than answers. Could a kingdom truly thrive when its foundation was laughter? Was there strength in folly, wisdom in jest? These were not questions to be answered with pomp or decree, but lived and learned in the clumsy steps of a people rebuilding more than just walls. And so, as the stars blinked awake in the evening sky, I donned my cap a little straighter, ready to face whatever absurdities tomorrow would bring, because, in this kingdom, laughter was not just the best medicine, it was the very magic that held us together. But just as I was feeling a rare flicker of peace, A sharp clatter from the courtyard below caught my attention. Pippin's bell was ringing wildly, his voice rising in an excited shout. Perhaps the storm wasn't quite over yet. After all, in a land where illusions and truths danced a perpetual jig, the next act was always just around the corner.